All right, we're back with the BMX Podcast, the BMX Commentator Podcast even. My name's Rich Eames, UCI BMX Racing World Championship commentator and World Cup as well. And we're back with a very special guest, someone who I've been wanting to speak to for a while. But I say that about everybody, but it's absolutely true. They're all people that I want to speak to. Somebody with a very good track record in junior development coaching and coaching in general, a very philosophical, interesting gentleman. And it's my pleasure to welcome to the podcast, Mr. Adam Carey. Hello, sir. How are you?
Not too bad, thanks, Rich. Thanks for having me on.
That's all right, mate. No problem at all. Glad to have you on. Like I say, interesting and philosophical. I've never described anybody like that ever. So, but yeah, we've got plenty to talk about. Obviously, we've talked in depth at Rock Hill because we sat and had dinner together, which was a really good night out. I really enjoyed it.
Yep.
And we talked about things that we could possibly talk about on a podcast, and here we are. So I think the broad brush spectrum of what we wanted to kind of discuss was based around development of junior athletes, I think is the broad title of it. So I'll start with a very broad brush question. What do you see as the key qualities in a junior athlete who is ready for development, kind of going into the teenage years and that kind of stuff? Because I know you work with a lot of kids in that age group, kind of, you know, Harvey Brooks, world champion, new world champion being the prime example, you know, competitor of James Clitheroe. So he's very much kind of like front of mind because I'm a fan of James's as well. So yeah, that when you're looking at a kid who's going to be really good as a junior development rider, what do you look for?
So I think that's a really interesting question in terms of what we actually look for, and it's not actually the physical characteristics in junior development. I mean, you want the results. You want, you know, physical power. You want physical strength. You want height, weight. Those things are early advantages in terms of BMX racing, right? You always see those massive kids going through and destroying the competition early on. And that is typically because of what we call early maturation. They hit puberty early. They get size, they get mass, and that is a winning formula for BMX when we sit down and look at, you know, the correlations between start and finish time, right? So how quickly you start means it's pretty well related to how quickly you finish. However, when you talk about the development of a whole athlete, we've got to remember that there is a lot more to racing than just your start times and your finish times. And I suppose the example for that would be if you looked at the Elite World Championships where Sylvain was, I think, in 6th, maybe 7th into the second corner and walked away with a podium and secured his Olympic spot. Now, that was primarily a perfect example of a holistic racer where skills, racecraft awareness all came in. And I think that when you ask about an athlete from a development perspective, you want an athlete who's willing to engage with all the tool sets that's needed in order to improve their performance. Quite often, even at 11, 12, 13, we see athletes and parents kind of short sheet their children by thinking that there's only one way in which we can win a race. And while there's the most common way, it's not always the way. Does that answer the question a little bit?
Yeah, it does. I was kind of thinking along the lines of, are there any, what I would describe as hidden markers that you're looking for? I suppose that's probably a different way of putting it.
Okay, hidden markers in an athlete, the way they talk, critical thinking. So the way that athletes think about the problems, that's the key ingredient.
Okay, can you give me an example of that?
So when you see an athlete, as a coach, when you ask an athlete what is a problem, so here's a video of your race and there was, say, 6 mistakes in that race. If they can identify those mistakes, that's the first marker. So you sit there and go, okay, fantastic. You've identified the mistakes that you've made in your race. However, really good development athletes will then make a plan to not execute those mistakes again. They'll want, solid execution. So they start to have forward planning in the way that they think about their racing and their performance. So I always come back and just label it under critical thinking. So if they can think critically about their performance and make a plan to enhance it, that's a fantastic development athlete.
Okay. Do you see young athletes being, I mean, everybody likes to think that they've got, supportive parents and that kind of stuff. And I think every BMX parent supports their kid in the best way they possibly can. Do you see parents enabling that kind of behavior, or do you feel that some may possibly hold their rider back?
That is that's probably the biggest question that you've asked in terms of how we could answer it. I would go to say that it depends on your social structure and home. So there's socioeconomic status, there's time management status. So if your family is working very hard, then it kind of, and they don't have a lot of time, and they're getting you to the track, but not necessarily being able to spend time watching and helping and, providing feedback on your performance. That kind of, I suppose, is the key, or not the key, but that is one contributor to an athlete not developing quite well. When you think about those family structures, there's also a lot of internal and external pressures, particularly from a point of up until probably 11 years old. The child is research has kind of shown that the child is primarily doing the sport because it's a family-based sport. They're not necessarily doing it for their own interests, would probably be the way that you could put it across. Once a child has the prefrontal cortex and the cognitive understanding of, what sport is to them, which is around that 11, 12 years of age, then they are able to start self-driving their training and their process into trying to develop towards professional sport. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's an interesting concept because, I've got a rider going through that exact process right now who's becoming very self-motivated and self-driven. Do you think that, a young rider is capable of that particular style of thinking maybe earlier, depending on the individual, or do you think some kids just don't grasp that at all, or maybe just get it a lot later? Do you think there's like an element of what I would describe as kind of late blooming, not only on the physical side, as you've discussed, but also on the mental and cognitive processing side?
Definitely. I was a late bloomer. I was an early maturer and a late bloomer mentally in terms of understanding how I can put the performance together myself. Pardon me. So I think that there's one thing that when you look at the way in which social psychology defines like trajectories, like if we're talking about an athlete or a form of, even the way our schooling system works, it's a linear step all the way up. And so there becomes a lot of kind of linear pressure in terms of how performance should look for an athlete. And that has in turn developed a lot of anxiety around performance, particularly with social media, because there's always someone doing something better than you. So you're in this state of constantly having pressure, always being better in your performance. Then you're seeing others that are perhaps doing one or two skill sets better than you. And what ends up forming is this anxiety around linear development. Whereas I think we need to kind of identify that skill sets are learnt up until a certain age. So the idea of learning BMX should be up until 11. And that's what I mean by learning BMX is like things like racecraft awareness, what sprints might look like, what gates should look like, what you might do for race food on the day. There's, a wide range of different things that you could learn. But once you have that cognitive, so once you have that brain ability to kind of think more laterally with your training and performance, that's when you should really start to bite into, well, how am I how am I building tool sets around me that will improve my performance?
Yeah, because I mean, what you said about the kind of linear developments, it's very much like high school, I suppose. You've got to hit this marker by this point, this marker by this point, this marker by this point, and if you've not hit that, then you are somewhere deficient, in which some kids just learn at different rates than others. So it's kind of like the whole not totally within BMX, but people think like that because it's what's based on high school, and it might not be what's best for the rider. So with that in mind, how do you feel for all the BMX parents out there, because I have a lot of BMX parents who listen to this podcast, what would you say are the kind of like the top tips for actually supporting your child in a kind of, how can I describe it, in a kind of progressive way and helping them to progress? Is there anything that, a parent they're always doing the best for the kids? That's completely and totally without doubt. And, in BMX, and we joke about factory dads and all that kind of stuff. But if you was to say, look, these are the 3 things that you can do to support your athlete that are going to give them like a really good platform or are really going to help to drive them forward, what do you think they might be?
So it kind of comes down to a couple of key things. Presence in the moment is really, really key. So being present with your riders is like the ultimate important thing. The one thing I will define is that parents and their children have a different emotional and social interaction than the coach. So while a coach can provide direct feedback when something has been done, whether it's good or bad, it will be more likely to be taken on board by the athlete. However, when a parent provides that feedback, particularly if it's in a heated moment, it's not likely to be received, and it's likely to cause more friction and anxiety. So what I always say to parents is, just like, with your phone apps or whatever, video all the races for your son or daughter, and take notes. But when it comes time for the day, it needs to really be about consistent messaging. And so when I talk about consistent messaging, we'll talk about the provision of cues, right? So it's like, you want to get to the inside, good gait, get to the inside and run a nice clean lap. That might be the 3 things that you say to your child all day, whether they're doing that or not. But that ability to reinforce what they're wanting to do changes their psychological output, right? So it's able to allow them to focus on the task of what they want to do, not what they're doing wrong. And so that gives you some breathing room to then being able to say, come back at the dinner table on a Monday night after Sunday racing and say, well, son, or well, little miss, this is what I've done with my, this is what I've written down here for your performance. Do you want to watch your videos and see what you can contribute to the discussion of like how we can improve your training or racing? Because a lot of the parents all provide that, like, kind of, you need to pedal here, or you need to manual that, or you need to jump that. And it's just the timing. So timing, be a bit patient with your timing of when you do these things, and have them at times where they're openly going to be received by your kids.
Yeah. Because I have a personal rule. I don't know if this is like common, but I always try, and if I have to have a chat with my athlete over anything, I say athlete, it sounds like he's my son. Do you know what I mean? I don't really want to call him an athlete, but that's what he is, and that's how he thinks of himself. So, if we have to have a discussion about something, if something's not gone well or whatever it might be, I always say to him, right, we'll talk about it later when all the emotion's gone out of it. If he's having one of those little meltdowns that all kids have, we don't discuss it at the time, we discuss it later, or we even discuss it the day after, whatever it might be. And I don't know whether I'm actually doing the right thing or not, but it feels like I'm doing the right thing. Whereas, obviously you'll see some issues where, parents are, having that rather loud discussion in the moment with the kid, and the kid's crying and all that kind of stuff. And it's I'm not saying it's wrong, but certainly I don't think you're getting a particularly brilliant outcome out of it when your youngsters cry, whatever. And again, people just operate differently, don't they? Some people like to knock it on the head there and then. Some people like to discuss it later. I'm one of those people who likes to discuss it later. But I think in terms of
it always comes down to when will something be best received, right? So if you're talking to your son or you're talking to your daughter and you are not feeling like they're there and they're listening, for me, I just stop talking, because it's not going to go in and be understood. It's not going to have that cognitive interaction that you would like. It's only when you're able to see and sense that your son or your daughter's engaging with what you're saying. And so what you just said, Rich, is fantastic. But you can tell when you see those interactions that are heated between son, daughter, and their parents, whether it's mum or dad, you know that it's not a point of engagement, it's a point of anxiety, right? Someone's crying, someone then gets I don't even know why I bother, and they'll walk off. And you sit there and go, well, that's been a completely wasted interaction, and one that's kind of been negative in terms of how feedback could be provided.
Yeah, I've had those interactions in the past as well, and learned very quickly that it probably wasn't the right way to do things. So it's a difficult one. It really is, because at the end of the day, you just love your kids and you want to see them do well. But yeah, it's a hard one to navigate for sure. The other thing I wanted to touch on as well was, have you had any kind of interactions with neurodiverse athletes? The only reason I'm asking the question is there seems to be, I don't know, BMX as a sport seems to be an avenue for neurodiverse kids to kind of engage in something that captures their full attention and that kind of thing. And I've heard and seen almost an increase, especially in the last couple of years, of neurodiverse kids coming into BMX because it's, like I say, it's a fully focused sport. Do you have any experience in that arena? And is there any advice that you could give to parents of neurodiverse athletes?
Yeah, I definitely do. And funnily enough, there's been a couple of elite riders or elite competitors that have been sitting in that category as well. I think the most important thing is providing variables in which they can control. And so when we talk about these, and I think the reason why it's so popular with BMX is because when you perform in team sports, there is a form of social interaction in order to get a task at hand done. So it's like if you're playing football, I'll say football, but in Australia or America, soccer. So if you're playing football, there's going to be there needs to be a social structure, a social hierarchy in terms of who's coordinating what, and also a team operation of how a play is executed. There is a lot of interaction there that doesn't necessarily sit well with people who are in that neurodivergent, I suppose, sphere, right? With BMX, while there is a lot of variables in terms of I've got to jump this, or I've got a manual, I've got to get to this corner, there's 7 other riders that I've got to worry about, there's only your own actions that you need to really control and operate in order to complete the race. And so that internal focus of yourself, I think, sits much more comfortably with people who sit in that neurodivergent sphere. So yes, I have coached and do coach people who sit in that category. And I find that the biggest thing is actually providing them with that awareness, that construction of what they can control, what they can influence, and then what's out of their control. So we talk about this as the three spheres of control. So primarily in BMX, we can only control the inside sphere, which is ourselves. That's how we respond to situations, say like weather, wind, who's in our race, what lane we have. They're the things that we can control and how we respond to them. support from mum and dad, what kind of feedback we're getting, whether we're getting videos or getting, time data with the scores system that they've got now, a whole bunch of different things. And then the things that are outside of our control are other races, weather, and all that kind of stuff. And I think that those sorts of discussions with athletes that are sitting in that neurodivergent category, I really think that those sorts of discussions allow them to feel a little bit more controlled and a little bit more empowered.
Okay, cool, fantastic. That's a great answer. Kind of moving forward with junior development in general. I don't know how it works in Australia compared to the UK. We have, like a pathway that young athletes can follow. Things like regional school racing, national school racing, that kind of stuff. How does junior development work in Australia? Is it at its optimum right now, or is there room for improvement?
I think there's always room for improvement. So after I finished up the head cycling job at Thailand, I came back and I started lecturing at a university here, and Luke Medill started the concept for the development academies, and he got in contact with me to just help out with New South Wales, and so 2 states here in Australia. So that's been running for a couple of years now, and it has had quite a successful introduction, if you will. But from my perspective, there's also, with any individual sport, there's always individual contempt when there's not, I suppose, a lot of public information or public selection that's involved. So there's a criteria that's up that you've got to meet. If you meet the criteria, you will be included in those development academies. It's something that is, I suppose, if you look at, say, the French program, we're definitely behind the ball. However, it is better than what we have previously had, which was, individuals seeing their own coaches. There was a lack of discussion and teamwork around the development of a single rider, which I think is really, really important. So, when you're talking about development coaching, especially around that 13, 14, 15 up age categories, it's not just one person who's providing all the answers to the athlete. There actually needs to be a team of people, and there needs to be kind of a discussion around what's going on. And I think that it's important for an athlete to understand that. And it starts to, when we go back to that, that critical thinking that I was talking about, an athlete then has lots of information presented to them, and they're able to think critically about how they can best use that information for their own performance. So that's where the development academies in Australia have started, particularly with the ones that I'm helping out with. It's one of those things that you want riders to develop towards Olympics, and you can kind of see that it is, especially in those junior categories, it's starting to develop a lot more, and the results are starting to show through a little bit better. So you just got to try and take those things in turn and kind of then recognize that we're reaching somewhere, right? But there's still also this massive room for improvement. So you've got to just try and find that balancing act.
Yeah, it seems like the Australians, especially at Worlds, were, certainly starting to come through, and you had various riders winning. Hawks, Cameron Gatt won, I think, if I remember correctly.
He won Cruiser.
He won Cruiser.
Yeah. That Wednesday cut short. Like he was looking really good.
Yeah. And then you've got riders coming through like Bellarmé, Tay Rufus, Declan McGee. They're the ones that kind of trip off the tongue that I've kind of seen plenty of over the last couple of years. And yeah, it seems like Australian BMX is starting to head in the right direction. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
I definitely think so. I think it is continuing to be a team effort, which is great. And I think that there's a certain number of coaches that are really dedicating themselves to improving their interactions with athletes. I think it's kind of shifted in the last 5 years from like that dictator style of coaching to I suppose a more discussion-based coaching format, which is fantastic.
Yeah. you've kind of been in a background for a number of years where you were developing riders in what I would describe as a developing BMX nation, which was Thailand. How big is the gap between a country like Thailand and a country like Australia in terms of rider standards?
Up from age class categories, so challenge categories, the gap is not as big as you would think.
Okay.
It is really just about that next step to the elite categories, and that comes through where you recognize that your training environment is ultimately really important. So from my perspective, in my time there, I was really trying to work on them having some infrastructure that would ensure a good progression of their development. And I suppose the infrastructure then would kind of, them having that would be like an encouraging prospect for them to hang around in the sport. Because, in Thailand, particularly with those young athletes, they get to 22, 23. If they haven't been selected for the national team at 18 or 19, they quit at 18. And then if they haven't had some form of success by 22, 23 in terms of, say, Asian Championships or SEA Games, they would be cut from the program. So it's a it's a solid program, but the timeline of support is accelerated as opposed to other countries. So yeah, look, it's very hard to develop from the 16 to the top of the elite category. It's extremely difficult to develop that.
Okay. How do those athletes compare when they move up to the elites? We've seen Thailand athletes, or Thai athletes, I should say. I do apologize to the people of Thailand. I've seen Thai athletes, come up, and guys like Comet who've been, there or thereabouts.
Yeah.
But there's not been one yet who's actually what I describe as broken through. Do you think that is something that they are capable of in the next few years? How do you see that program developing? I know you're not there anymore, but
look, you hope for it. I would hope for it. I think Comet's a fantastic athlete who is very young and has a lot more in the tank in terms of his progress and development. It would be great if he was at the UCI Centre. I think that would be a fast track for him to continue his development. And I know TJ and the guys there do a fantastic job, but it's one of those things where that's the decisions of the Cycling Federation that obviously need kind of that pre-discussion. And it kind of comes down to I suppose when you get into the finer arts of it, it's like, well, where's Comet going? Like I always come back to that question of where Comet would benefit most. He's going to benefit most at the UCI Centre. Yeah. And so if he's not there at the UCI Centre, why is he not? Well, then that's the other questions that come up and probably wouldn't be discussed in open format. But I think, it's a real shame that he had a real chance. He won Asian Games against some fast competitors and secured his Olympic spot, which is, amazing. I was really shocked that they wouldn't try and keep developing. I mean, at that time, that was 2023. Start of 2023, end of 2022. I can't remember the exact date. But he had enough time to get another couple of bike lengths out of himself leading up to the Olympics. And that would have put him in a really good spot to contend, say, for a semi-final. But, yeah, alas, it is what it is. So we'll see. That's the short-sighting of the Cycling Federation in terms of where they want to go with the program.
Right. Okay. I'm going to change gears slightly. I'm going to ask about you now.
Oh.
And your trip to Rock Hill for the World Championships, because we are fresh off the World Championships, and you were involved in that very competitive Masters class. So I'd love to get your view on it, what you thought of the racing, what you thought of the standard, what you thought of your competitors. I'm not going to go into the cancellation side of things because it's just been flogged to death. But I just really want to know what you think of masters racing at the UCI level?
I had a blast. I couldn't get the gate. I am such a slow learner. Rich, you know me. I'm like as a BMX racer. If it's not kind of like I don't adapt well to change. So that side of things, I love BMX, but it probably wasn't the sport that I should have pursued. But I absolutely had a blast. I couldn't get that gate, so I was making moves in the first turn, and I had some people speaking to me in various languages about the lines that I was choosing, trying to get into the top 4. So I had a blast racing, and it was just really nice to get back to that kind of racing level because, 2 years ago I had rearranged my leg. I had a pylon fracture of my right ankle. My tib fib, I lost about 2 inches of leg, and so they had to build it up with 21 screws and 3 plates. So my whole goal was to get to this World Championships and do as well as I possibly could have. So I did that. I had a blast. I got to see all my athletes do really well. I think there were 7 finals out of my 12 riders that were there, or 10 riders that were there. And I got to watch some of the elite racing, which is, in person, it's always so much more entertaining.
Yeah, yeah. When you're kind of like in the depths of a moto with like Barry Nobles, Emilio Falla, you mentioned about the various languages that were being mentioned in that term when you were looking for lines. Is there plenty of chit chat that goes on in those motos?
I don't think it's like it's definitely not in the racing. Like there's more like sounds of like oh we're in trouble here. Like I've overjumped something, or I definitely find that there's a little bit more technical mistakes in the racing as we get older, and that's just getting older, and I'm going to say my eyes don't work as well as they used to. But I definitely. It's just so much fun to go to the World Championships and pretend that I'm 25 again and I'm on the gate with the guys that I was on the gate with then. It is a proper throwback, and it allows me to be a little bit younger than what I was or what I am. And we all get out there and battle, and we all train hard, and we're all still fit. And I just think those guys are those guys are legends, right? And so you get to enjoy those little moments of reality where you're at a World Championships. You look out and you see the grandstands are kind of full. Your gate comes up and you hear set, and then you kind of all kind of blankets out, and you clear the mechanism, and away you go. You do your race and you cross the finish line, and then it's all smiles, except for a few people that wanted a better result. But it's about just enjoying those moments. For me, I had so much fun, and some of the guys that I got to race against were incredibly fast, which is awesome. And hats off to all the guys that got those results. I don't know, like when you talk about the day cut short, I don't know what the if, buts and maybes would be, but you've got to enjoy the moments when you get them.
Yeah. Absolutely. Moving on to the elite side of things, I know we had a little discussion before we kind of started recording, but who impressed you on the elite side, both male and female?
You couldn't go past Sylvain and Joris. So they're both back from injury, and what an opening of a bank account. They were genuinely impressive. Kai White had a amazing scramble to make that final. You probably would agree with that, right?
Yeah, agreed.
Like that just shows some absolute tenacity to make things happen. And ultimately that would have secured him the Olympic spot, I would imagine.
Yeah. It's TBC, I believe. So
yeah,
I'm not going to put the GB jersey on him yet and stick him on the plane, but yeah, it's it was superb performance from Kai. But Kai's always had that ability to just, like you say, scrap his way through, pick off people down like the third and fourth straight, and generate that speed off the backside of jumps. And it's certainly the skill that's served him well. So very, very impressive. with the Worlds, obviously you had Joris win, he's 32. You had Elise win, who's 33.
Yeah.
That's kind of, in some sports, you kind of past your prime at that point, and yet our two world champions are both, south of the age of 30, or north of the age of 30, or south of the age, north of the age of 30. Yeah. So is 30 plus becoming the new 22?
Very interesting question. I think it's really an eye-opening thing. How, it comes back to what I was talking about with there was a support viability study that was done around the World Cups, just around when the first Olympics happened. I can't remember if it was 2009 or 2010, and they looked at the winning. They looked at the ages of those who were winning. And so, things like in Australia, the Australian Institute of Sport funded BMX athletes only till they were 26. And so, but the people who were winning in 2010 have been winning, like, Joris won his first World Championships in what was it, 2011?
Yeah, Copenhagen.
So 2011. So he's been winning since 2011. That is an extended career. And it's just something that kind of shows that realistically you can keep your performance going for quite a while. Speaking physiology based, you recognize that, Cavendish was 38.
Something like that. 36, 37 maybe. I can't remember. Yeah.
So you sit there and I think he was 38 when he won his last stage, right? So
right, okay.
So you sit there and you recognize that this is the benefit of, as an exercise physiologist, you recognize that there's some benefits of following a process towards getting an outcome, and that age doesn't necessarily define it. It does eventually. We all get older eventually, and we all get to the point where we can't do what we used to do. And you have to define your personality around that when that comes. But, these guys are still well in the hunt. And so you recognize that I think Joris might have been unsatisfied with what happened at Tokyo. He slid out the last corner in third. So this is an opportunity for him to come back. And so, as long as you're still hungry, why let age define you? Barry Nobles is riding insane, and I think he's faster than he's ever been, and he's 37.
Yeah, something like that. 37, nearly 38. Yeah. So,
to a degree, age is just a number.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. I'm glad you're thinking like that. So yeah, there's time for everybody yet, I think. So yeah, it's all good. I really enjoyed the Worlds.
Actually, sorry to interrupt, but
it's all right. Fire away.
One thing that absolutely blew my mind is the consistency of what was the guy who won the under-23 from Ecuador?
Pedro Benel Salzaguero.
Yeah. Now I don't know about Tulsa, but he was the only rider to make he was like one of three riders to make all semi-finals in the first 4 rounds of the World Cups in under-23.
Right.
So, because under-23 has been, there's marks of inconsistency across there. You could see one day one rider would win the final and the next day would go out in the quarterfinal, right? And so I was just blown away by his consistency, and he has continually chipped away at better and better results. And to win that World Championships, I was like, that has been a fantastic program. Whatever program he is following, that was a fantastic stepping stone program in order for him to achieve that outcome.
Yeah. His performance was certainly good. I've really enjoyed under-23 racing in general because it's been very mixed up. You've had different winners at all the World Cup rounds, and the quality's there, and I think it's a great stepping stone into kind of the elite categories. So yeah, I'm a big fan of under-23 racing. I think it's been a really good introduction to the sport.
It's been, I think, a big savior for a lot of riders, because I think we come back to that discussion of linear kind of progression.
Yeah.
And so if you step into that elite class and it's not the way that it has been pictured in a linear fashion, you just develop so much anxiety towards how you're performing, and you start questioning yourself unequivocally.
Yeah, definitely. So I suppose as we approach kind of like the end of our podcast, have you got any kind of advice for up and coming racers in your position as an exercise physiologist, in your kind of professional capacity? If you could suggest one thing that a young up and coming rider could do to aid their development, what would it be?
I think that's a really hard question, because the answer is not one that people really think is like a measurable outcome, but it's to really develop a process. That development in a process orientation, the process orientation is the ultimate goal of what we want to do. So many riders say, oh, if I can squat this much, or if I can hit this many RPM, or if I can get my gait time to here, all things will be fixed. And it's like, well, no, but you haven't addressed the mental awareness, the mental aptitude, the race awareness, the nutritional based things, the sleep recovery, the fatigue recovery management. There's so many things that are missing. So in order for you to have improved performance and continued improved performance, there needs to be a process in which you follow. And that process looks slightly different depending upon your strengths and weaknesses. If you're an early maturer, it will look different. If you're a late bloomer in terms of maturity, it'll look a little bit different. But yeah, we come back to that. I always come back to that. Develop a process, develop a plan, give yourself a full year for that plan. And if you aren't making inroads, if you're not like improving, at least by the 3-month mark, then you need to sit down and have a question as to why.
Phenomenal. So there you go. I think that's summed it up absolutely perfectly. Develop a plan, follow the process, regular kind of check-ins and see if things are working, and adjust as necessary. It sounds like a plan not only for BMX but for life as well.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest. Like, we've had this discussion before, Rich, where you recognize that not everyone is going to be an Olympian, and that's okay. But you want to be your best version of yourself. You don't want to just kind of like, oh, well, I'm not an Olympian, I'll just give up. And because that's not going to get you anywhere either. And so I think, for a lot of the riders that I work with, it's like, well, okay, if we don't reach those target goals of where you want to achieve, you're going to walk away with this tool set that you can take towards something, or whether it's another sport, or whether it's a job, or whether it's a trade, or whether it's a degree, and you have a tool set which will allow you to think more clearly about what's going on. Because I think that a lot of the times riders just don't arrive to the problems quick enough.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that is like one of the biggest issues that I see. And so if I can get a rider to engage with that process orientation, you get the Harvey Brooks, that was his first World Championships. That was his first ever time at the Worlds, and he walked away with he rode cruiser on what was cruiser day? Cruiser on the Monday,
Sunday,
Monday, yeah, something like that. He rode cruiser. He recognized that there was riders pedaling lighter gearings than he was, and so we went through that discussion of, well, what's your plan? He said, I'll give myself a bit more room. And then he decided that lane 6 was his thing, and that was it. He went ahead and executed. I just had to sit there and hand him a water bottle every now and then and say, good job, mate, keep going, because he'd already done all that work, 6 months ago.
Right.
And that's the take-home message. A lot of the guys that I had at the World Championships, we just went with this idea of leading up about 8 weeks out. We said World Championships are today. So every session was World Championships.
Right.
And so by the time you get there, all that anxiety about one single event, it's just a fleeting moment where you recognize, oh, holy moly, I'm on the gate, and it's the World Championships. And then it's back, clear the mechanism, back into, present moment, you're watching the lights, you're listening to your beat, whatever it is, and you're ready to go.
Phenomenal. Excellent. Right. Seems like a good place to wrap it up. But, you know, I think there's a million ways we could go with this discussion. I'm sure there's room for a part 2 further down the line. And if there's not, we'll get together for a beer and a steak at a race somewhere, and we'll just put the world to rights like we did the other week. Albeit non-alcoholic beer on my part. But yeah, it's been good. Yeah. It's been an interesting conversation. What I'll do is I think I'll wait for feedback from the listeners and that kind of stuff, because I've been lucky enough to get some good feedback, and if people kind of indicate that they would like to hear more on certain topics, or they would like us to cover other topics, because your kind of professional level in terms of being an exercise physiologist, having a PhD, being an experienced coach, I think there's a lot that we could probably bring in if people want certain topics discussing. So it could be that we get you back on for a part 2 at some point down the line, if you'd be up for that.
100%. You've got a good audience base and everyone loves listening to your silky smooth voice. And so if they want to pose out a bunch of questions, we can go through a Q&A, and I can just sit there. And unfortunately for me, I've had enough time where I've kind of been a jack of all trades at some point, having to fit gaps in various systems. And so I think there is one thing that I would probably be keen to discuss, and that's kind of like that social anxiety that comes in with sports performance at one point. And I think that really needs to be recognized with parents and athletes, because we all feel certain things when we are racing. Like you've talked about it before, there's this like robotic approach to like being an athlete, and it's definitely not that. Like, it's this shell that we portray, and it's a persona. So in order to delve into the really successful performance, we also need to deal with the things that are kind of, it's just like dealing with the physical stuff. You need to deal with the problems at hand and make a plan to get around them.
Yeah. I mean, I wish I'd had the ability to understand process orientation when I was racing, because I would have days where I was kind of like properly on it and was racing quite well, and then I would have days where I was just a complete mess and just couldn't string a lap together. And I think if I'd have known and understood about process orientation and controlling the controllables and all that kind of stuff, the kind of stuff that I'm trying to drill into my lad now, to not make him understand, but enable him to understand and have a better performance. If I'd have understood all that when I was a kid, I think my racing scenario would have been somewhat different. But I never had that coaching. I never had that support. It was just go out, ride your bike, have fun, go as fast as you can, which was what it was in the 80s and 90s. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't, there wasn't that level of kind of knowledge, coaching, support, that kind of stuff. So I'm just doing the best now to enable, my athlete to have the most fun he can, but also to do it in a sustainable way. But yeah, process orientation, massive. And I really appreciate your offer to do a Q&A, because I think that would be well received by the audience. I think I would get a bunch of questions in. So what I'll do with that is, thinking out loud, I will leave that for a few weeks, a month or two, something like that. We'll get you back on. We'll do a coaching Q&A. We'll get people to send questions in, and we'll just ping questions at you for 45 minutes and see what we get out of it.
Yeah. Now, I also want to point out too, what you've just mentioned too is hindsight is 20/20.
Yes.
Like that's one thing that I always come back to. Hindsight is 20/20, and sometimes our roles are to learn those things in order. So like a coaching role, I've made all the mistakes that I've seen athletes make. I've made all those little neurotic changes to the bike, and I've changed crank links, and I've changed gear ratios, and I've done all these things and learnt all these things in order for me to then have a solid understanding about, well, this is a normal process that goes on with a rider, and this is how I can help them build around it. And so what you've just described, Rich, is your experiences have taught you lessons that you're now helping pass on to Nathaniel. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
I don't see that as time wasted. And I always think like I've never regretted anything that I've done on my bike and what I've missed or what I haven't achieved. It's just been I've had fun along the way. And I think that it's like, that's what it is for me. And I've got to make peace with that. And then I've got to now use what I've got to help others in the community.
Brilliant. Yeah. That's a spot on place to end it. So yeah,
nice.
Help others in the community. I like it. Cool. Adam, thank you so much for coming on the BMX Commentator Podcast. I am genuinely grateful for your input. I can't wait to get you on for part 2 because I think people will be frothing to ask some questions. So yeah, it's definitely going to happen. That's for sure. And yeah, just thank you very much for getting up very early on a Sunday morning in Australia and jumping on and having a chat.
Most welcome, Rich. Thank you.
Lovely. Thanks, mate. Speak to you soon. Cheers. Ta-da.